Good morning, everybody, on the second day of our evidential hearings in this phase of Tranche 2. I have to say something at the beginning of every long session, and I'm going to say it now. Anyone who has a mobile electronic device with them may use it to transmit silently to the outside world, subject to one thing, what you have seen and heard in the inquiry, but only 10 minutes after the event that you're describing. You may not use the device for recording proceedings or taking photographs. When you entered the hearing venue today, you were required to agree to an order restricting onward transmission or communication of information set out in an annex. The information will not be published in the hearing transcript and will not be transmitted via the YouTube stream. Counsel to the inquiry will direct the witness not to refer to it in their live evidence, but if they do so, we may need to pause proceedings. The purpose of this is to give effect to an order which has been granted to protect the legitimate rights of an individual who is not a former police officer. Her name is a name which may be known to you. Material in the documents which name her will be put to this witness, and it's a condition of joining the Zoom call, which will transmit to those who participate in it what is going on in the hearing room, that you agree to be bound by the order which restricts onward transmission or communication of the name of that person. I'm sorry that's all very complicated. I hope that it is understood. If it isn't, then Shawana Williams at the back of the hearing room, who has her hand raised, can explain it to you if you have any queries. Thank you. Mr. Barr.
Good morning, sir. We may swear or affirm Mr. Pearce, please.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Could you tell us your full name, please?
Roger Charles Pearce.
You've prepared a witness statement, Mr. Pearce, dated the 14th of January 2022. Are you familiar with the contents of that witness statement?
Yes, I am.
Are the contents of that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief, or would you like to make any corrections before we start?
No, they're true and correct.
Can we start with your pre-SDS service, indeed your time studying for the bar? You tell us that you qualified for the bar in the 1970s in London. Can you help us with the training in that era? Did you have any formal training about legal professional privilege?
Yes, there was. My training was by private study, first to do an LLB and then to do the bar exam through Middle Temple. And I'm sure that the legal study did include material on legal professional privilege, so I would have been familiar with it from that training.
And in how much depth would you have been familiar with it?
I can't recall, but I certainly knew about the iniquity clause in LPP, the exception to privilege.
And you knew that communications between lawyer and client are privileged?
Yes.
Did you have any developed understanding of confidentiality circles involving privilege?
Could you repeat that?
Did you have a developed understanding of confidentiality circles and privilege?
No.
Can I move now to your time on B and C squads? When you were either at Hendon or being inducted into Special Branch, did you get any training on legal professional privilege?
Well, I believe that through the Special Branch training course and preceding that through the CID course and preceding that through recruitment training into the service, there would have been included material on confidentiality and legal professional privilege.
And in how much depth did that go?
Little depth.
Is it right that you learned what Special Branch was interested in from your time in Special Branch before joining the SDS?
Yes, I learnt what Special Branch was interested in fundamentally through training on the Special Branch initial course and the Special Branch intermediate course, which importantly included partnership training with MI5, which focused upon espionage, sabotage, and most importantly for SDS, subversion. So in that way I did have training before SDS.
You would have found out more about particular subjects working for B Squad and C Squad, is that right?
That's right.
Although you weren't with C Squad for very long, were you, before you joined the SDS?
I think a matter of weeks or a couple of months.
Was that long enough to gain an understanding generally of what Special Branch was interested in so far as the left wing was concerned?
I believe so, yes.
And anarchists?
Not anarchists specifically, but Trotskyists certainly, and even the Communist Party in those days would have been significant.
Did you have, when on C Squad, any role at all in preparing public order threat assessments?
I did not.
Did you know that intelligence was coming to C Squad from the SDS?
I can't say with certainty that I did, because SDS was held in such security, but it's possible.
But you knew the unit existed, if not
Yes.
the detail. And was it known that a secret and reliable source was probably the SDS?
A secret and reliable source would be human intelligence, so it could be from an agent or it could be from SDS.
So on the basis of those answers, I'll ask it anyway, but I understand the qualifications. Were you in any position to form a judgment as to how useful the SDS was to Special Branch at that stage?
Yes.
And how were you able to do that?
Well, I assume this was a unit of Special Branch officers who had worked on Special Branch squads, who were deployed to gather intelligence on subjects which were of interest to C Squad.
But you weren't able to evaluate the specifics because you weren't entirely clear what was coming from the SDS?
That's correct, yes.
Can we move now to your recruitment into the SDS? Without mentioning any names that might be restricted, you were, to use the vernacular, tapped up by HN86.
Yes.
What did he say to you when he approached you with a view to joining the SDS?
He said, this was in the corridor, he said that Mike and Angus would like to have a chat with you. If you want to approach them, they will willingly see you to consider you for a role in this unit.
Did he tell you anything about what the unit did or what life might be like?
No, but by that stage I was beginning to form a view of the kind of work they did and the kind of life they led.
Did you have further conversations with HN96 about life in the SDS before you started?
It's quite likely, because at that time he was in the back office awaiting deployment himself. So it's probable, especially as he was a friend, and he and I had worked together on B Squad, it's quite possible that I would have seen him subsequently to discuss in greater detail the prospect of life as an SDS officer.
I see. Did he mention anything about the stresses of the job to you?
No.
Did he mention anything about the risk of being approached by women for sex?
No.
Did you, when you were in the back office, look at reports such as HN20s?
Pardon me, sir. It's quite probable that I did.
And so you were able to get a flavour of how he reported?
Yes,
And some of the other officers as well?
that's true.
Was there any difference between the way they reported and the way that Special Branch reported generally?
The impression I got was that SDS followed the practice of comprehensive reporting, which I think the inquiry is familiar with, in which security intelligence is preceded by detail about the subject's perhaps personal details, private details even, intended to build a pen picture or to enable the reader to understand what makes the subject tick.
It was a wide approach, wasn't it? Hoovering up a lot of detail for analysis by others.
It was, and I saw the SDS reporting as a more extensive version of that because the SDS officer was actually in place and would be in a position to garner far more intelligence about the subject being investigated.
When you were in the back office, I'd like to ask you about what you witnessed so far as communications between your immediate SDS managers and their superiors. How often, shall we start with the period when the office was in New Scotland Yard?
Yes.
How often were the S Squad senior managers communicating in any way with your DCI and DI?
I think quite frequently and informally, either in person, by walking from one office to the other, or by telephone. I don't recall it being particularly structured, but I recall it being deep and close between people who had known each other for many years and who knew what made the other tick.
It's right, isn't it? The officers were very close at that stage.
Yes, it was.
Was it literally a case of senior managers putting their head around the door or vice versa?
That's precisely it, yes.
Once the office moved out to Vincent Square, could you describe the frequency of contact after that, please?
I can't really comment on that because by that time I was in the field and not really in a position to see the kind of connection between immediate SDS managers and their own managers who were still at New Scotland Yard.
You've said in your witness statement that Geoffrey Craft would frequently visit the safe house, so you would see him there?
Yes, indeed.
Did you see other S Squad and C Squad managers visiting the safe house?
I don't recall any C Squad managers visiting the safe house, but I do recall Geoffrey Craft in particular, and there would have been other senior managers of S Squad who would come to visit us.
Yeah. If we move to those then, please. The Assistant Commissioner Special Operations, Gilbert Kelland, and later Geoffrey Deere. Could you help us, when they came to the safe house, could you describe what happened? And I'm interested in how long they stayed and what sort of conversations were had.
Yes. Well, first of all, Gilbert Kelland. Gilbert Kelland did come to the safe house, enjoyed our undercooked chicken and cheap wine, and just expressed thanks for what we were doing. And then after lunch, sat in the living room and invited us each to give him a pen picture of the kind of work we were doing. And I think that would have lasted probably a couple of hours. He'd clearly set time in his diary to spend a prolonged period with SDS. Geoffrey Deere, who was Assistant Commissioner Personnel, I think came to Vincent Square at the invitation of S Squad management, and I saw him with one other officer, SDS officer, to give a more formal briefing on the kind of work SDS did, its responsibilities, its difficulties, its problems, and its successes. So it was a different nature of meeting from Gilbert Kelland, much more relaxed, informal and social, and that with Geoffrey Deere, which was formalised and for specific purposes.
Would it be fair to say then that ACSO Deere would have a decent working knowledge of what the SDS was doing and the challenges it was facing and what it perceived to be its successes?
Yes, and I think it's important to note that Assistant Commissioner Deere wasn't ACSO, he was AC, I think Personnel it was called at the time. And that's very important for us because it indicates that SDS was opening the door slightly to the Met hierarchy who dealt with personnel issues, and Geoffrey Deere showed great interest in the work we did and would have been aware of the personal difficulties, psychological stresses, relationship difficulties, and the rest of it.
And when you say psychological stresses, could you expand a little on what Assistant Commissioner Personnel Deere would have learnt about those?
I think about the double life, the question of false friendships, the stresses on relationships at home, possible, or the potential stresses on that, just the specific discrete problems of serving as an SDS officer, which were unique and bore no relation to that of a regular special branch officer.
Was there any mention in any of those conversations of anything sexual, by which I mean the potential for sexual activity between undercover police officers and those they were infiltrating?
I don't believe there was.
You tell us that Commissioner Newman visited as well.
Yes.
Could you help us by expanding on what happened when he visited?
It's approximately the same kind of meeting as that with Gilbert Kelland. But I do recall Commissioner Newman showing great enthusiasm and support for the unit. And I recall him in the living room after another dangerous lunch, smoking his pipe and expressing gratitude for the way that the work of SDS officers brought life to the dry and arid reports with which he was faced every day. That's the kind of comment from Commissioner Kenneth Newman which stays with me to this day.
Was there a feel that it was exciting and special work?
No, it was a feel that he appreciated the stresses and strains. Secondly, that he realised that this methodology was the only way to get particular strands of intelligence, that is, they would be unavailable from other more conventional means, and his appreciation that the work was unsung, and his emphasis that it was of high value, not just in intelligence terms, but in appreciation from the top management of the Met at Scotland Yard, from the Commissioner down.
And what sort of stresses and strains were communicated to the Commissioner?
The double life, essentially. The need to build false friendships, the emphasis on the belief that to lead a double life, a life of deception, and to build false friendships required an officer of great integrity. So it was an almost anomalous situation where the life to live a lie required great honesty and integrity. That was the point which I think we pressed home with Commissioner Newman.
Why did a role that had dishonesty fundamentally at its heart require integrity? Integrity.
Because the most pressing need was to maintain a sense of proportion, to retain the anchor in one's real life, to be sure that what you were doing was necessary and justifiable, and to come out of it unscathed. And I think the point about integrity is that this is the quality of a stable individual who's rooted in his real life or her real life, and the more you're rooted there, the more capable you are of living the false life because you have the real life to return to. I think that's the kind of impression we were trying to convey and which they took on board, I think.
You've used the phrase necessary and justifiable. Was there any discussion with the Commissioner about the necessity and justification for the SDS's work?
I think there was an acceptance from him and those around him, Geoffrey Deere and other Assistant Commissioners of Special Operations, that they could rely upon the judgment of S-Squad managers, C-Squad managers, working in partnership with MI5 to come up with subversive or public disorder targets which were justifiable in the national interest and conform to the Harris definition of subversion, for example.
Is this supposition on your part, or can you recall conversation about it?
It's supposition, but I truly believe this is how they would have approached the subject matter.
And coming back to integrity and close relationships, was it understood that there was a risk of things going too far, getting too close to people?
Yes, I think of getting too close, not exactly towards Stockholm Syndrome, but to a situation where one's false life took precedence over one's real life. And that was really an important matter for SDS immediate managers to face every day.
And was that something that was talked about regularly?
No, but it was understood. I think that there was an assumption all the time in every interaction with, for example, those in the back office who were of great value to us, or the DI and the DCI above them, that the constant thing to look for was in any officer any sign that the balance between the false life and the real life was being upset or put in jeopardy.
How was it understood if it wasn't talked about?
I think it was through general conversation, making sure that people came to meetings and turned up and were willing to speak about what they were doing, to explain any particular reports of special interest, how that intelligence had been acquired, and just a general appraisal, as any good manager would do, of the people under their command.
So it was talked about?
I don't think it would have been talked about. I think it would have been understood that you would be looking for frailty, looking for signs of stress or difficulty, and prepared to take action thereafter. But I can't recall ever a structured conversation about the things I've just raised.
I don't mind whether they were structured or unstructured, but was this an issue that was discussed in any way at all?
I think it would have been discussed from time to time, yes.
Coming back to integrity and the risk of relations becoming too close, there are any number of problems that can develop if that happens, aren't there?
There are indeed, yes.
You mentioned a couple of them earlier. One of them is, another one is sexual relationships, isn't
Yes.
it? Was that similarly something that was sometimes talked about?
It wasn't talked about, and I thought a lot about this. I think the reason it wasn't talked about was that it would have been a disciplinary offence to have engaged in a sexual relationship whilst living undercover. It would have been a matter of discreditable conduct. And this was so strikingly obvious to any police officer who lived beneath the discipline code that it would possibly have been seen as unnecessary to raise as a specific issue. That was on a par with the doctrine about agent provocateur. These were such bright red flags that they weren't raised as specific problems in advance of any field deployment by the office. I can't recall them ever being raised with me, and my assumption was that they were felt as such obvious red flags that it wasn't necessary to raise them explicitly.
You said in your witness statement that there was a high risk of sexual relationships developing
Yes,
in long-term undercover
yes.
operations. Was that risk ever discussed at all during your time in the SDS?
No, it wasn't.
And so from a point of view of your managers, we're in a position where there's a high risk, but if your assumption is right, because of the disciplinary system, nobody is talking about it.
I can't recall it ever being discussed with me, no.
And you've described the sergeants as having their ear to the ground. If they've got their ear to the ground, is this one of the risks they're looking out for?
I think almost certainly.
And how are they doing that?
They can only do that if the officer engaging in a sexual relationship admits to it. And I think the essence of the underlying essence of these very difficult matters is that the officers kept these relationships completely secret.
But there are ways of dealing with it, aren't there? One can ask about who an officer is associating with, what sort of friendships are developing, and to keep an eye on whether or not a strong relationship is developing with a member of the opposite sex.
Indeed, one could ask outright, what's going on between you and this particular target, if anything, but the officer could just keep this a secret and say nothing, and I think that's probably what happened.
Let's keep those two concepts separate and start with the asking about relationships, just to see if there are any warning bells ringing. In your experience of the SDS, was there ever any questioning, subtle questioning along those lines?
I believe not.
And asking outright?
I believe not.
With hindsight, do you think that was a mistake?
Yes, I think with hindsight and with knowledge of what's transpired over the years, there should certainly have been more inquiry, more searching questioning of officers about all their relationships, not just those which might potentially become sexual.
But the risk was something you were aware of at the time?
That's true, yes.
So if you were aware of the risk at the time, it's not just a matter of hindsight, is it? It could have been done at the time.
It could have been done at the time, and I think if I may say, the issue was that SDS was inviting married men, generally, almost entirely, to live as single men for nearly half a decade. It's inviting conventional individuals with partners and families to live the life of an unconventional radical or revolutionary. This in itself would raise potential red flags. So I believe that it should have been raised more fully at the time. There should have been a whole programme really of questioning about the potential pitfalls of the life we were inviting officers to lead.
It was inviting trouble, wasn't it?
I think that's fair to say, yes.
Can I move now to communication between the SDS and the security service? At the moment, I'm interested in the period when you were in the back office.
Yes.
What level of communication did you witness between the SDS back office and the security service?
So far as I can recall, regular phone calls, daily phone calls, a very friendly relationship between the principals from both sides, scheduled meetings with security service, and I think also unofficial, unscheduled meetings, perhaps after work for a drink or over lunch for a drink. But I recall a relationship that was flexible, quite deep, and pretty relaxed.
Part of your preparation for deployment was to attend twice weekly meetings with the undercover officers who were deployed.
Yes.
Did you find that a useful way to learn?
Extremely useful.
And in what ways was it useful?
because individual officers would take you aside, share their experience, particularly about the logistics of finding a job, finding a flat to live in, the kind of address you should look at and go for, the kind of detail you might need to be aware of before you went into the field. And I remember one example as make sure you know your star sign, because that comes up in the pub and it's a most natural thing to ask. So it was essentially the guidance from serving officers was to watch out for the small things, because they're the things that can trip you up. And I found it immeasurably helpful.
And you were in the back office for some months, weren't you, before you deployed?
I think around 6 months.
So did you feel you'd had sufficient exposure to those who were actually doing the job?
I did, yes.
And I'm getting the impression that they're giving you all sorts of tips and guidance about fieldcraft of all sorts. Is that
Indeed,
fair?
yes.
Was there any discussion of how to deal with members of the opposite sex?
No.
Are you sure about that?
Yes, yes.
Even though there was an obvious risk?
Yes, it's a curious thing, but it wasn't discussed. People would talk about their comrades, but not in sexual terms or not in gender terms. It was just in terms of the security interest. There was never any discussion about the risk of sexual relationships, because again, I think everybody assumed that this was such an obvious risk that it didn't merit overt discussion.
Was there, for example, any discussion of how you might build into your cover identity something which would help you to avoid or to decline without offending a sexual advance?
Well, I remember one possibility in particular, which was to, if the issue became difficult in the field, to be accompanied by a female special branch officer as your girlfriend. But of course the obvious difficulty here was that the people you were living amongst would immediately try to recruit her to the revolution or to the group. So that was really a non-starter. It was discussed in general terms of the kind of life you invented for yourself. So you might say you had a girlfriend or a family member living somewhere outside London to offset the chance of an approach from comrades in the group you're targeting. But this wasn't to do with the avoidance of sexual relationships, it's to do with the avoidance of compromise generally.
And who were you having these discussions with?
I think just field officers who were serving at the time while I was in the back office.
But surely having a girlfriend, a fictional girlfriend, is all about deterring sexual advances, isn't it?
Well, it's showing that you had a life outside the revolutionary group you're living amongst. But it wasn't specifically to deter sexual approaches, it was just to demonstrate that you had a full life. Later on, of course, it became increasingly difficult as approaches were made, and you had to manufacture reasons for not succumbing to sexual advances.
Would it be fair to say it was one of the reasons? Would it be fair to say it was one of the reasons why you would say you had a girlfriend?
Yes, yes.
And was that understood at the outset?
That's fair, yes.
Was there any discussion at all in your time before you deployed, any recognition that having sex with somebody who did not know who you really were would be wrong?
I think I return to my earlier point that this would be an assumption. And of course, as things have transpired, there's the deep sorrow and regret, which is now expressed by the Met and all those involved in SDS or special branch work, is an indicator that had they known at the time that was happening, this would have been seen as serious, disreputable and discreditable conduct of such a nature and so obvious that it wasn't discussed at the time.
Just to be clear, so I've got an answer to my question, was there any recognition at the time that you heard that sex with people who did not know who you really were would be wrong?
No, there was not.
Was there any discussion of trespass and the law of trespass?
No.
Was there any discussion about the circumstances in which you might or might not enter a private home?
No, there was no discussion at all of that.
Did that position continue to be the case throughout your deployment, or did it change?
Yes, and of course at that time there were no privacy guardrails, and our assumption was that this would not feature as an impediment to the work you did. So the SDS officer would not pause on the threshold or even think about the implications of trespass or breach of privacy.
When you say an assumption, did you ever direct your own mind to whether entering someone's private home was or was not lawful?
Frankly, no.
Was there any discussion about the law of confidence?
The law of...
Confidence, breach of confidence.
No.
Was there any discussion of the circumstances in which it would or would not be lawful to take or copy personal information from your targets?
No, there was not, and I think mine was the anarchist target, so I think there are particular characteristics there which would have encouraged greater endeavour to obtain personal private information, because there was so little otherwise available through a more, for example, a more structured revolutionary group.
Well, we may come to some details in due course, but in broad terms, you hoovered up a considerable amount of private information, didn't
That's
you?
true.
In accordance with usual special branch techniques.
Yes, yes.
Was there any discussion of, at the risk of repeating myself, legal professional privilege?
No.
No discussion of the circumstances in which you might or might not report on communications between lawyer and client?
No, there's no discussion of that within SDS.
Was there any discussion about reporting on members of parliament or other elected representatives?
No, but I think this is the third tranche of the obvious for our sexual relationships, agent provocateur, and just anything to do with privileged conversations with a lawyer, anything to do with members of parliament, anything to do with medical information, and even anything to do with journalists, was kind of in our minds as special branch officers as an area to be avoided. So there was a generalised awareness that these were tricky areas, but no, as far as I can recall, no explicit advice given within SDS.
Had you been given any explicit advice about any of those matters when you joined Special Branch or whilst working for Special Branch?
Only to the extent, as far as I can recall, that these were high-risk areas and to be avoided. Members of Parliament, anything that's to do with medical information, anything to do with legal information, and even information about journalists would be a dangerous area.
Well, you did report on all of those things.
Yes.
I'll give you the opportunity without restraint. So if you've been told there were high-risk areas, why did you do that?
In terms of legal professional...
All of those areas. Why did you report on them all if you'd been told they were high risk?
Well, because if you're in the room, what's said is said. You can't, as the Americans would say, you can't unring the bell. You've heard what you've heard. And I think the primary duty is to report everything you hear. And it's almost a first draft, and one relies upon the office to edit, filter, and produce a report which might contain the germane intelligence, but not the methodology by which it was obtained. I would see that as the responsibility of the office and not mine.
Is the reality that the special branch way was for officers to report on all of those matters in the way that you actually did?
Yes, these would be difficult areas, but my primary duty as an SDS officer was to report what I heard.
Did you have any involvement in the preparation of intelligence reports when you were in the back office?
I did, yes.
What did you do?
I think we had the raw intelligence notes from the SDS officer, and a colleague, a DS colleague, would redraft that report into a workable and serviceable special branch report in terms of accepted structure and format, and then it would be sent through the system. So my role was to observe that, at times assist with it, but it wasn't my principal job.
I think you've described it as topping and tailing. You put the little blurb at the beginning, put the file references at the
Yes.
end. In terms of the actual meat of the report, the substantive information, that was coming in from officers trained in the special branch way. To what extent, if at all, was that content altered?
I think generally it was forwarded as the officer had drafted it, as the field officer had drafted it, with some syntactical corrections or grammatical corrections. I don't recall in my brief time there, I don't recall the content being being materially altered in any way. And I can't recall in my time there reporting coming in on these problem areas involving, in particular, legal professional privilege.
It appears to be the case from the reports that we've recovered half a century later, 40, 50 years later, that in fact nobody ever edited or filtered these.
Right.
On the basis of your evidence, you had no reason to understand that the sergeants were doing it. Did you have any knowledge at all about whether anybody was in fact filtering and editing the reports that were being sent by the SDS to C-Squad?
Yes. Well, to the best of my recollection, in my time in the office, I believe that some reports from field officers were edited, and the format, which was top and tailed and sent through the system, did differ and was shorter than the very raw report sent in by the field officer. So I think I would have assumed as a field officer myself that the same practice would be applied to some of my reporting. But my strong feeling was that my obligation was to report what I heard, describe what I saw, and as the magnet, attracting iron filings, as it were, submit everything I could, and it would be for the office to structure the report, which may or may not be of assistance to our partners in MI5. So my assumption in the field was that mine was the first draft, I'm obligated to report everything, and the office would take from it what they needed.
Can we move to cover identities? Who instructed you to use a deceased person's identity?
This was seen as the practice at the time. It was very difficult for us, it was distasteful, but in the pre-digital age it was seen as the...
Could you just answer the
Yes.
question, please?
Yes.
Who instructed you to do that?
I think the managers in SDS.
Your DCI or your DI?
I think DI probably, yes.
Was there any written guidance, however informal, at all, about how to go about the exercise?
No.
Are you sure about that?
Well, to the best of my recollection, there was no instruction, no written instruction, no guidance. This was, if my memory serves, this was officers advising you how to do it. And of course this may have come from field officers during my time as an apprentice, as it were, who were telling me how they had done it.
Passed down from generation to generation of undercover officer.
Yes, it seems that way.
When your turn came, you tell us that you picked an 11-year-old child, striking a balance, I'm inferring from your evidence, between ability to find the death certificate on the one hand and the amount of evidence in the real world about the real child's existence on the other. Is that fair?
That's fair, yes.
And the decision to do that had come on the advice of one of your predecessors?
I think this was possibly advice from officers in the field at the time. It may have come from the DI in the SDS office, but it seemed a sensible way to go about the process, and that's what I did.
Were you given any advice by anybody to look at the circumstances of the child's death?
No.
Did you address your mind to the circumstances of the child's death?
Quite possibly I did.
The child you chose, Roger Thorley, had died in a road accident.
That's correct.
That's the sort of event that gets reported at least in local newspapers, isn't it?
Yes.
A memorable, if tragic, event. Isn't that a problem at a number of levels?
It would be if it had been reported and was still evident. I think in my limited research of this child, I found no trace of any reporting of his death.
Can you recall, I'd like to be clear about this.
Yes.
Can you recall looking for reports about Master Thorley's death or not?
I can't now recall that, no.
Not only does it give rise to a risk to your cover, if it was a memorable death, but also to the level of distress to a family if your use of the name ever becomes known.
Indeed.
Am I right to understand from your candid witness statement that no thought whatsoever was given to the family at that stage of the process?
Our thoughts were, at that stage of the process, that this would never become known, and distasteful though it was the only method available to us. But above all, this would remain secret forever.
And would it be right to say that no thought was given to what the SDS would do were your cover blown and the fact of your use of this identity to become known?
That's true.
Did you have any concerns about using the method?
Yes.
What were your concerns?
Well, as I mentioned, it was deeply distasteful. This is a tragic death which we're exploiting, really, to use for cover. Against that, we believe that the family would never discover this secret. And against that, we felt it was necessary to achieve the mission of the SDS.
Were you actually told why to use a method?
I believe I'd formed my own conclusion, and possibly been told as well, that there was no other way of achieving a convincing false identity except by having a record in Somerset House that you'd actually been born. So I suppose my point here is that as you drove away each day to work with anxiety in the pit of one's stomach, you had to feel secure that you would not be betrayed by your name. That's the thinking I recall having on numerous occasions while in this deployment.
Was there any discussion at all about the alternative, using a fictitious identity with
No.
an excuse as to
Sorry,
why
no,
there was
no,
no,
there wasn't.
birth certificate?
No.
Were you given any choice in the method?
No, there was an assumption that this was the method, this was the standard operating practice at the time. There was no discussion about alternatives. That was the method to be adopted. So it wasn't exactly an order, but it was an assumption.
Did you ventilate your qualms?
Did I ventilate my?
Your qualms?
No,
Did anybody go with you to Somerset House?
no, I was alone.
You visited Stoke-on-Trent, which was where Master Thorley had
Yes.
grown up.
I believe so.
What did you do there?
Well, to the best of my recollection, which is blurry now, I think I just drove around the streets. I might have looked at a couple of schools and then returned.
Did you cause anybody on your behalf to look into the family?
No,
Were you aware that a few years before you had joined the SDS, HN297 Richard Clark had been confronted with his death certificate?
no,
Nobody mentioned that to you at all?
no.
Did you, as you were going to work with the comfort of a birth certificate that might withstand scrutiny, ever worry that somebody might look a little further and dig out the death certificate?
Yes, and the comfort from that was that I think there was an 11-year intervening period which gave greater resilience to the confidence that it wouldn't be discovered.
It would take, in those days with manual records, a very persistent researcher.
Yes, so I think the principle was that the greater the time lapse between birth and death, the greater the confidence one might have that the name would remain secure.
Did you have any plan for what would happen if the day ever came when you were confronted by a death certificate?
No,
To your knowledge, was your legend ever tested by the anarchists with whom you mixed?
I'm confident it wasn't.
Were you required to hand in your fake driving licence and rent book, or driving licence and rent book in your cover name at the end of your deployment?
I believe so.
You've given some evidence in your witness statement about the meeting involving you, your wife, the DCI and the DI at the time. You've said that was after you'd built your legend and before you deployed.
Yes.
You've described that meeting as very intrusive. In what ways was that meeting intrusive?
We covered the things you'd expect. He's going to be living a different life now. He's going to be away from home a lot. He's going to be living in quite difficult circumstances. So the family as anchor becomes all the more important. Do you, as his wife, feel confident in him doing this and in yourself being able to sustain it? That was the kind of regular expected conversation. But there was an additional layer from these two officers with whom we were on very good terms, and that was the effect of your husband's appearance, demeanour, possible change in temperament, the stress he would be living under, the impact all this might have, in particular the appearance, upon your social interaction with existing friends and even neighbours who wouldn't have any understanding or knowledge of the job on which he was deployed. And that was, to me, a very important factor.
You've said that your wife was advised to call in to the office if you did not seem right.
Yes, she was advised to, without telling me, feel that at any time she could call either of these officers if she had concerns about me.
Was there then some discussion leading up to that to indicate that there was a risk to your well-being and your mental health, even if not expressed in those rather more modern terms?
I think it's fairer to say it was implied.
The 1970s were, relatively speaking, quite a promiscuous time.
Yes.
Left-wing groups, in which I would include anarchists, were known to be promiscuous groups. Is that right?
I don't think I would particularly agree with that. I recall John Jones, the Director F, who composed the definition of subversion later used by Lord Harris, according to Peter Wright in his book Spycatcher, saying that we couldn't possibly deploy MI5 officers into these left-wing groups because they're promiscuous and because there are certain sacrifices that even an MI5 officer can't make for his country. So there was an assumption there that these were promiscuous. I don't think it was entirely fair, but it was assumed in both policing and MI5 circles.
Did your wife know that you were going to infiltrate anarchists or not?
I beg your pardon?
Did your wife know you were going to infiltrate anarchist groups or not?
Yeah, she did.
Did she express any concerns that you might be mixing with a lot of members of the opposite sex?
No.
Did your managers raise the possibility of sexual temptations?
No.
Did you?
No.
Was anything said about the risk of sexual activity?
No, but I think implied in their assurance to her to call us without telling him if you're concerned about anything, I think implied in that was the risk that he might be, or you may suspect that he's having a sexual relationship or in danger of having one.
But nothing said expressly?
No, that's correct.
Was, when you were preparing to deploy, the secrecy of the SDS emphasised to you?
Yes.
In what terms?
In terms which really mirrored my experience of SDS when I'd been on C Squad and even on B Squad before that it exists, but no one knows anything about it and you don't talk about it. So when I joined SDS, that was a natural progression of that air of confidentiality and secrecy.
Was the importance of the SDS remaining secret rammed home?
Not rammed home, it was assumed.
Were you given any advice on what to do if you were compromised?
No.
You've told us in your witness statement that your cover accommodation was a bedsit.
Yes.
Did you ever stay in a squat?
I didn't stay in a squat, but I spent a great deal of time in squatted premises with other comrades.
Was that restricted to daytime, or did you ever stay the night?
Daytime and evenings, but I never stayed the night.
Could we have a look at a document, please? It's in file 2, tab B27, sir. It's 29193. This is a document which records a meeting between the SDS and the security service in February 1983. Could I ask you to look at paragraph 2, please?
Yes. Oh, thank you.
F7 commended the work of HN85 and was assured that he would continue until mid-1984. SDS are already looking for a replacement. Our consideration was given to the 121 bookshop being a separate target, but this was ruled out as it would require a UCO to live in the collective. Were you aware at management level there was a desire to avoid having UCOs living in squats?
No.
Was that possibility ever broached with you?
No.
Does it make sense to you?
Living in a squat would be something to be avoided at all costs, not just because of the squalor, but because there would be no privacy. You would be living with other people, and that would greatly aggravate the difficulty of maintaining cover.
And it would also make avoiding forming overly close relationships with people more difficult, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Can we move now to targeting? When was it decided that you were going to be targeted against anarchists?
I simply can't recall specifically whether this was put to me or whether it was something I suggested. It could be that in the back office I had recognised a gap in the market. So it may have been a two-way thing where I'd suggested it and they'd proposed it. That may have come before the proposal.
Are you able to say who confirmed that you were going to be targeted against anarchists?
No, I can't, I'm sorry.
Can you recall how it was communicated to you?
No.
What was your understanding at the time as to why anarchists should be infiltrated?
My understanding at the time about anarchists and the justification for infiltrating them was that they qualified as a subversive, I can't say movement because there was no real movement, but they qualified as, they fitted the criteria for a subversive organisation or grouping. They also fitted, for me, with the Richard Main Peelite principle of doing activity of which the public would be supportive. And even if it's the cartoonish anarchist figure holding a bomb, anarchists in the public mind are people to be watched and monitored and so on. In the subversive context, because of what they had done in the past in terms of Angry Brigade, Persons Unknown, other activities in the UK and abroad, they could be seen as, within the Harris definition of subversion, a threat to the safety and well-being of the state with a purpose to undermine democracy by violent means. So I felt on those two levels, the public support level and the MI5 SDS security interest level, they were a justifiable target.
You describe your brief as being very loose. How loose was it?
It was loose, and it was loose because, as I say, there was no movement. There were, I think what I can best describe as, there was an anarchist terrain of shifting sands, of small cells and groups which would rise up and fall away as their members fell in and out of friendship. It was extremely difficult to find a group to pitch one's tent on because it was such a moving feast, really. And the ebb and flow was constant among small anarchist groups.
That's a description of what your target area was like.
Yes.
I'm interested in the degree of discretion that you were granted. I'm getting the impression you were granted a very high degree of discretion as to how you infiltrated the anarchist field. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And what did that mean in practice as to how you went about the task?
It left really quite a difficult situation to be resolved because there was none of the, if I may say, critical mass of a group such as SWP with branches and secretaries and treasurers and membership lists and finance lists and so on. There was no existing data on which one could place one's objective. You had to work this out in such a way that you found a group which would give you the best possible chance of endurance over 4 or 5 years and the widest access to the plethora of groups which, as I say, spring up and fade away very quickly.
I mean, you've explained a lot of this in your witness statement, so we don't need to repeat it, but I'm sensing that it was a process between you and your managers by which you arrived at the Freedom Collective being a good place to anchor yourself within the anarchist movement. Is that fair?
Yes, and I'm not sure if this came from me or from the office. All I can say is that for me, as I think I said in my statement, within the shifting sands, freedom was the rock which had been around for 100 years or so, and there I could pitch camp, and this would allow access and credibility.
And you have the idea that seeking to write an article for freedom would be a good way of making a first approach.
Yes, a kind of minimum requirement for freedom would be that one wrote for the paper, so this seemed to me the most effective way of making my initial approach.
We know that you've published some books in later life.
Yes.
Did you have a passion for writing even then?
No.
So was there any connection between your idea to write and any personal interest in creative writing?
No.
Purely utilitarian?
Yes.
You start your deployment by, in fact, attending meetings being hosted by groups which are anti-nuclear in a very wide sense, not just nuclear weapons, but nuclear energy. People like the Portobello anti-nuclear group.
Yes.
It's clear from your witness statement that you are using them as a stepping stone to build up your entry into the anarchist field. What I'm interested in is to what extent you regarded groups such as the Portobello anti-nuclear group and London Peace Action as worthy of reporting in their own right.
I think on that I'd say two things. One is that I recall growing concern within Special Branch, and I think within MI5, about the growing anti-nuclear movement and the possibility that propaganda and ideas could tip over into direct action. But the second point is more important, really, in that I was using, certainly Portobello Anti-Nuclear Group, I think London Peace Action, as a means to develop cover and for my legend, and to gain credibility for the task that lay ahead.
The Portobello Anti-Nuclear Group and London Peace Action are definitely not groups that are trying to overthrow the state.
Of course, yes,
And they are not causing riots in the street.
correct.
So what, in law and order terms, was there? Was there any concern about them or not?
There was not.
You did report on them. Would it have been open to you to say, these people are not subversive, these people are not a law and order concern, I'm going to use them to build my undercover persona, but I'm not going to report on them? Could you have done that?
I could have said that, yes.
Was that the special branch expectation at the time?
The expectation would be, without doubt, I would report on meetings I had attended.
Regardless of the threat posed by the group?
Correct.
You report on some meetings of the Portobello Anti-Nuclear Group in relation to the Royal Tournament in 1980. Perhaps we could look at those. The first one is, sir, it's F2 tab C1, and for the projector it's 14096. And if we could just expand the top half of the document. If you need to see more of it to orientate yourself, Mr. Pearce, please say so.
Thanks.
Is this subject to the topping and tailing, which would have been done by others? Is the substance of this report your work?
I can't recall, but Dick Shepherd House rings a bell.
And this was the group that you were using to build up your cover?
Yes.
It says, paragraph 2, that there was a meeting on the 9th of July. The date of the report is the 11th of July. We'll hold those dates in mind for a moment. Okay. Paragraph 3, the meeting chaired by telephone privacy, was convened primarily to discuss strategy for a proposed, quote, anti-militarist presence during the Royal Tournament, which is currently taking place until the 26th of July at Earl's Court Exhibition Hall, SW5. 2 members had reconnoitred the area that evening with a view to selecting the most favourable site for a demonstration. And then it goes on in the next paragraph. It was agreed that action should be planned to precede the evening performances of Saturday the 12th and 26th of July. About 13 people agreed to participate in the first demonstration, which would be heralded by a press release and reinforced by a news story intended to arouse greater interest in the second event. Next paragraph. The nature of the action presented difficulties because of the ease with which any stationary demonstration could be moved on by police. Eventually, 3 areas of activity were decided upon. 1. About 5 members would meet at 4 o'clock on the 12th of July outside the Warwick Road entrance to Earl's Court Underground Station and rehearse street theatre in Fulham Cemetery, Lily Road, SW6. The theatre would be performed outside the main entrance hall to the hall or in Warwick Road. Stopping there, what was your understanding of the legality of performing street theatre in Fulham Cemetery opposite the entrance to Earl's Court?
I'm so sorry, I just can't recall the report. Although I accept it's mine, I just cannot recall the substance at all.
I think for this question you might not need to. No. Performing street theatre in Fulham Cemetery opposite the entrance to Earl's Court, a police concern or not?
Not.
the remaining 8 members would meet outside the Warwick Road entrance at 6:15 the same day and distribute leaflets in Warwick Road and outside the hall itself. And then over the page, little 3, there is some detail about how entry would be affected through a stairway. This report is filed. You would expect it's got marked as having gone to the security service, the mark on the left. You would have expected it to be disseminated by the SDS to C Squad?
Probably I would.
And C Squad would decide whether or not it had any public order value?
I think that's right.
And if they thought it did, it would be disseminated to the appropriate borough police.
I think that would have been my thinking at the time.
Can we take that down, please, and go, sir, to tab C4, and for the projector, 14126. We saw the dates. The date of the meeting was the 9th. The date of the report was the 11th. The date of the protest was due to be the 12th. This is a report dated the 25th of July 1980. Para 2. Privacy has stated that the anti-militarist presence staged by London Peace Action during the Royal Tournament on Saturday the 12th of July was neutralised by the police, whose excessive numbers thwarted members' attempts to perform street theatre and distribute leaflets outside the exhibition hall at Earl's Court. The overwhelming likelihood is, Mr. Pearce, that this is your report, isn't it?
Yes.
Neutralise is an interesting word. Was it a police objective to neutralise protests such as this?
I wouldn't have thought so. I think that's the word neutralise has come from the member of the group. That's his choice of word, I'm presuming. I can't think that police would regard neutralise as an appropriate comment for dealing with a exercise of street theatre like this.
Could we take that document down now, please, and go to Sir C9 and for the projector 14231? And if we could just have the top half of that expanded, please. This is the 2nd of September. I didn't take you to the detail in the last report, but they were going to have another go and have another protest later in July. This says, Para 2 records the fact of another meeting at Dick Shepherd House of London Peace Action, and paragraph 3, the actions against the Royal Tournament at Earl's Court on the 12th and 26th of July were considered to have been reasonably effective, although excessive numbers of police had proved obstructive and overbearing. It was agreed that the group's presence alone had made an impression upon the mind of the public accustomed only to military propaganda. So it appears that they were marginally more successful on the 26th of July in staging their protests.
Yes.
But again, in all probability, your report?
My report, but I don't think it would necessarily have influenced the numbers of police deployed at such a major event as this.
Would the Royal Tournament be seen as a sensitive and important event?
Yes.
That might indicate, might it not, that C Squad would have been more likely to pass on intelligence about a sensitive and important event.
Indeed, yes.
Might this series of documents show an unintended or at least unfortunate consequence of reporting on a group that was not subversive and was not a law and order threat?
Yes, certainly, although I would add again the comment that an event such as this would have been well policed anyway. I can't be certain that my reporting would have caused the police to increase numbers monitoring the event.
And what would have been the police attitude at that time to the sort of street theatre outside the Royal Tournament 1980? Would it be regarded as a sort of embarrassment that needed to be neutralised?
I would have hoped that the police would see this as an inevitable and almost welcome part of a celebration of the Royal Tournament.
Doesn't appear to be what happened, though, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Can we now move to the way you were tasked to report upon anarchists? We know that you were given a very wide brief, but we know that you spoke to your managers. How frequently did you talk to your managers about what you were reporting and what you should report?
In the field, I would discuss with them anything of interest or substance or importance twice a week at the safe house.
And did that include what you had reported and what they would like you to report?
Sometimes, on occasion, it would just be a question of submitting raw reports that have been written at home or at the cover address. On other occasions, they might call you into the little office bedroom that they had in the safe house to discuss a particular event or organisation or individual. Thirdly, I might ask for a chat with one of the office team as well to discuss something in particular.
But in terms of what the intelligence requirement was, did the frequency with which you discussed that with your managers remain constant, or did it decline as you became more used to what was expected of you?
I think it remained constant and may have even increased because of the, I think, growing numbers of requests for assistance from MI5 and possibly from C Squad as well.
If I've got the chronology correct, and you were there, I wasn't, so correct me if I'm wrong, by the time you deployed, the DCI was Butler and then after Butler, Short.
Yes, that sounds right.
Was there any change in approach between DCI Butler and DCI Short?
Not that I can recall. I think the most telling feature for me about both of those DCIs is that they maintained and even developed the strong partnership with the security service, and I believe with Home Office as well.
On the question of the security service, sir, I'm in your hands. I'm just about to move to the security service. Would now be a convenient time to break?
I think it would. And so we will break for 15 minutes to permit our transcriber to have her usual well-deserved respite. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Pearce, I'm going to move now to your interactions with the security service. You tell us in your witness statement that from fairly early on, you were meeting with someone who we will not name from F6.
Yes.
Can you help us by fairly early on? What do you mean? Months, weeks, years?
I think possibly from 1981. That would be a guess, but it was early on in my deployment.
Was there any particular trigger?
Yes, as I understand it, MI5 had an interest in coverage of anarchists and my particular deployment, and I believe that they made an approach to the DI on SDS at the time for a one-to-one meeting with me.
Was this before or after the Brixton riots in April 1981?
I can't recall. I think possibly before.
You tell us that you then met with your contact every 3 to 4 months.
Approximately, yes.
And did that continue for the remainder of your deployment?
So far as I recall, yes.
We don't have a great deal of written evidence about contact at this stage. We do have a document from September 1982 which explains that a then recent meeting had occurred with the knowledge of HN68, but not of the DCI. In your meetings, was it your understanding that you were being authorised to do this by your DI, but that was as far as it had gone?
Yes, but I should first say that in view of the document to which you've just referred, my bipartite meetings with the security service would have emanated from that time, so it's later than I've just stated.
Okay, from September 82.
Yes.
We do know there came a time when more senior managers did know and did authorise meetings between you and the security service, but there was one not very long before your exfiltration and one afterwards. Can we assume that everything before those two meetings was authorised only up to DI level?
No, I don't recall there being any element of secrecy about this. As far as I understood, the meetings were declared, and they were followed by written confirmation by MI5, because it would be a case of we discussed X. They would write in to say, can we have more intelligence on this particular individual or organisation? So I think we can infer that the meetings were known about by the management of SDS.
I mean, the security service call them briefing notes, and we've got plenty of those, shopping lists in the vernacular, about what they want, but they don't expressly refer to there having been a meeting with you. But your clear understanding, as I'm understanding you, is that they were the product of face-to-face meetings approximately 3 to 4 months.
Yes, my clear understanding is that the initial meeting was set up as a result of an approach from MI5 to the DI on SDS, but meetings subsequently, although not declared, were known about because I would make no secret of them, and I think I would assume that I had told the office and they were encouraging it.
Can you recall any specific instance which would definitely confirm that more senior managers knew?
I think I may have said that in my early morning phone calls each day, I might have said, today I'm seeing X.
So can I take it, certainly there was no attempt to hide this contact on your part?
That's true.
You say in your witness statement that you were given the letters that I'll call shopping lists.
Yes.
Is that right? Did that happen throughout the period that you were undercover?
I think it's truer to say I wasn't given the document, but at one of the twice weekly meetings, I'd be invited in the way I've described earlier, and shown the letter, and told MI5 would seek more intelligence on this particular group or this particular individual.
Okay. Well, let's look at some of those requests and then your consequent reporting. Could we start, please, in File 2, Tab B7, and for the projector 28825. Now, this is a loose minute from F7 to F6 with the title Brief for SDS. Could source provide information about the anarchists involved in the Committee for the Enthronement of Prince Edward and its plans for the royal wedding day? 2, has source any information about the intentions of other anarchist groups, South London Anarchist Black Cross, in brackets, for the royal wedding day? And that is dated the 15th of June, 1981. Can you recall being asked to gather this intelligence?
No, I can't, but I would just add that June 81 is a date which seems to precede the approach of MI5 to my DI on SDS for a private separate briefing.
Yes, so this is before, on your, as best we can piece
Yes.
things together, before you're talking to them face to face.
Yes.
But we do know that they are providing briefs for the SDS, which, as I am understanding it, are being relayed to you orally.
That's correct.
If you can't recall it, do you have any reason to doubt that you would have been asked to gather this intelligence?
No.
Could we go, please, in the same file to tab C82, which is 15465. This is an intelligence report dated the 30th of June 1981, so just over 2 weeks after the brief. And for present purposes, could we go to paragraph 6, which is at the bottom, the paragraph at the bottom of the first page, please? Activity for the day of the royal wedding was discussed. Privacy outlining plans for a grand anarchist festival entitled What Wedding, to be held on the day at Hampstead Heath, where he hoped to organise bands, a football match of opposing teams from the 121 bookshop and the Autonomy Centre, and other similarly unedifying events. If the Heath proved unsuitable because of a ban on live music, an alternative location would be sought. And then if we could go over the page to paragraph 7. In the light of the recent arrest during the Trooping the Colour, the general consensus was that any direct action to disrupt the wedding would be both counterproductive and dangerous for those involved, the chief threat coming not from the police, but from the murderous inclinations of royalists lining the route. Is it reasonable to assume that this is your response to the request we've just gone to?
I can't recall it, but it seems reasonable to assume that.
And from a point of view of informing the police what was going on, you're telling them there's going to be an event on Hampstead Heath, but at the event itself, there probably won't be direct action because they're worried about the royalists.
Yes.
Could we take that down, please, and go in the same file to tab B9. That's 28827. And this is a loose minute from the security service, which we can see from the second page is dated the 16th of July 1981. So very shortly afterwards, just over another couple of weeks further forward in time. It's a shopping list with requests for various bits of intelligence. It starts, I attach a brief for your next meeting with SDS. Could we look on the first page, please, under the heading Autonomy Centre, at the bottom paragraph in that section? It says, can source provide its precise address and location within the O warehouse? And the background to this was the Autonomy Centre was being set up, wasn't it, in Wapping?
Correct.
If we could, next paragraph down, we see Royal Wedding. Apart from the Autonomy Centre 121 bookshop football match, what other anarchist events are likely to take place on July the 29th? So continuing interest in the Royal Wedding. If we go below that, Brixton riots. Has source any information about anarchist involvement in the recent outbreaks of violence in Britain? What role is the 121 bookshop currently playing? And then below that, under the heading Freedom Collective, can source provide details of the recent visit of Freedom members to Northern Ireland? Why were blank contributions about the visit not published in the latest edition of Freedom? Can source provide identifying particulars of blank who was reported blank to have travelled to Belfast? And then it says in manuscript your name. Again, is it likely that this intelligence requirement was communicated to you?
Yes.
And let's have a look and see what might tally up with that. First, can we go to tab C87? That's 15477. And if we could have, we see that this is an intelligence report dated the 17th of July 1981. If we could have the first page highlighted, please. And I'm going to be interested in paragraphs 1 to 7. So if we start at the top. Thank you. About 8 p.m. on Saturday, I'm starting from para 2, the first substantive paragraph. About 8 p.m. on Saturday, the 12th of July 1981, in Railton Road, SE24, Privacy of Freedom Collective were arrested during the course of serious disturbances in the Brixton area. Privacy states that he was subsequently charged with threatening behaviour and having possession of an article with intent to commit criminal damage, and Privacy with attempted GBH on a police officer. The next paragraph, after an appearance at Camberwell Magistrates Court on the afternoon of Monday the 14th of July 1981, Privacy was released on bail with one surety, Privacy of Privacy, an anarchist and frequent visitor to the 121 anarchist bookshop in Railton Road. A condition of bail was that he did not venture within 1 mile of Brixton Underground Station. He is to reappear at Camberwell on Thursday, the 13th of August 1981, when he will elect for trial by jury. The subject has written a harrowing account of his arrest and detention for Freedom, Volume 42, Number 14, under the pseudonym Privacy. Can I just stop there and ask you, harrowing account, was that serious or sarcastic on your part?
I think probably I'm looking at it through this person's eyes and the eyes of those who are reading it. So it's, I think, serious.
Thank you. Paragraph 4, privacy was remanded in custody until Wednesday, the 22nd of July 1981, and is currently detained in the hospital wing of Brixton Prison, Jebb Avenue, SW2. He was charged under the name Privacy, a pseudonym he has used on several occasions, and his prison number is Privacy. Although police searched his address at Privacy and removed some papers, Privacy is said to have taken the precaution of removing incriminating documents such as his passport sometime earlier, possibly to the home of Privacy at Privacy. Paragraph 5, Privacy were wearing masks at the time of arrest, which occurred when SPG units drove through police cordons on the south end. Privacy admits to having been in possession of a brick which he intended to throw at police, but denies that any petrol bombs were thrown. This may be significant in view of the fact that Privacy clothes have been removed for forensic examination. Other anarchists known to have participated in disturbances are Privacy, and his girlfriend Privacy. Several others, such as Jean Weir and Patricia Giambi, are keeping a low profile in the aftermath of their arrests during the riots of the 11th and 12th of April 1981, and Giambi is thought to be making frequent changes of address. 7. The circumstances surrounding the participation of these subjects in the disturbances is significant in corroborating previous assessments of anarchist involvement, which has been reported as disorganised and unpremeditated, if violent and at times concerted. At the outset, Privacy were at the Interaction Resource Centre in Kentish Town, making badges for the Watt Wedding Festival, and became involved on their return to Brixton in the early evening. Privacy only went to the scene on hearing a news bulletin. Indeed, all the evidence presently available serves to indicate incitement after the event rather than conspiracy before it. Now, am I right to understand that what had happened between the briefing in June and this report in July is that there had been a further disturbance in Brixton, and you are reporting on the arrests from that further disturbance?
Yes.
But would I be right to understand you clearly understood that the security service was very interested in this sort of thing, and this is very much reporting on anarchists in Brixton and any connection with the disturbances?
Yes.
And I read out the full build-up to it, but the key paragraph, paragraph 7, is your analysis as someone who is infiltrating the anarchist scene as to what role anarchists are playing in the disturbances in Brixton.
Correct, yes.
And the role is reactive.
The role in that report is reactive, but there would be, I think, other reports from me to suggest...
We will be coming to those in due course. But at this stage, it's fair to conclude you are servicing the security service requirement, and would I also be right to say a Metropolitan Police Special Branch requirement?
That's correct.
Can we now go, take that down please, and put up 15489, which is tab C88. This is a report dated the 27th of July 1981. And if we could look at paragraphs 2 and 3 in particular, please. The Autonomy Centre has had a telephone installed at the O&N warehouse, Wapping Wharf E1. The number is 4813537. The conversion of the warehouse to render it suitable to be used as a club is nearing completion, and an inaugural meeting has been arranged for the 1st of August 1981. Would you have regarded this as fulfilling in part the request that we looked at a moment ago for details about the Autonomy Centre?
Yes.
Can we take that down, please, and go to 15500, which is tab 89, sir. And if we expand that report, which is dated the 30th of July, a central figure in the production of the anarchist publication South London Stress is Privacy, known as Privacy, who is believed to work for the London Borough of Lambeth and has close ties with the 121 bookshop in Brixton. Again, the sort of information you understood the security service and Special Branch wanted.
Yes.
If we could take that down, please, and look at 15509. It says moving to file 3, sir, and tab 91. And could we look, please, at starting at paragraph 2. This is 30th of July 1981. Between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. on Sunday the 14th of June 1981, a meeting of the Freedom Editorial Collective took place at Privacy, 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 the home of Privacy, attended by 12 persons. I'll just stop there since it's the first example we've come to. You often attended meetings of the Freedom Editorial Collective at people's homes, didn't you?
Yes.
And based on the answers to my questions earlier this morning, that was not something you gave any thought to or had any concerns about.
That's true.
If we could move on to paragraph 3. With the exception of Privacy's reports on the Autonomy Centre and the split within Black Flag, few matters of security interest arose, and the highlight of the meeting was a pitched verbal battle between Philip Sansom on one side, supported by Alan Alban, Privacy, and Gillian Fleming, and Privacy with Privacy on the other. Could we move down, please? If we could have 2 and 3 up together, that would be helpful. With the exception of Privacy's reports on the Autonomy Centre, sorry, I've read that, for the review section on Ireland for volume 42, number 13, intended to mark the visit to Belfast Anarchist Collective by Privacy, Privacy, Privacy and Privacy, had brought to a head the differences in personality and ideology within the collective, which, until now, had been suppressed by the pressure of simply producing the journal each fortnight. Privacy had written 3 lengthy articles on Ireland, almost entirely pro-Republican, and for Sansom, entirely unacceptable in an anarchist publication. If I could pause there, it's fair, isn't it, to say there were some serious differences of opinion within the Freedom editorial collection about the question of Northern Ireland, and in particular the Republican movement.
Yes.
And in broad terms, on the one hand, there were those who regarded the provisional IRA and Sinn Féin, provisional Sinn Féin, as simply statist and would just be one regime replacing another if they were to prevail.
Yes, statist, chauvinist, authoritarian and sexist as well.
And on the other, there were those that thought that they're attacking the state, we're against the state, and we should support them doing so.
Correct.
We'll come back to that fracture line a little later, but for present purposes, could we go on, please, to look at 5 and 6? 5, I think, largely sets out the problems. 6, in the event, the argument continued the following evening at the Freedom premises where, with the exception of Privacy, the editors refused to publish Privacy's articles without substantial alterations. Inevitably, when Privacy refused to allow her material to be diluted in any way, the articles were rejected. 2 articles were published by MG, the initials of Privacy, pseudonym of Privacy, alias Privacy, used by the subject in Larne and Belfast. So this is reporting about the Freedom Editorial Collective's approach to publishing articles about Northern Ireland, and there are details about the visits and some of the personalities there, aren't there?
Yes.
And that is feeding the intelligence requirement that we looked at earlier, isn't it?
Yes.
Could we take that down, please, and look at 15527, so it's tab 94 in file 3. This is the 12th of August 1981, and if we could look at paragraph 325 first of all. And this is a meeting of the Autonomy Club, which took place at the warehouse in Wapping. The meeting was chaired by Ronan Bennett, who stated that to date the club had 80 members. However, due to the day-to-day running costs, £50 per week would need to be raised in order to survive. Iris Mills suggested letting the premises to other groups as a means of raising money. Albert Meltzer then intimated that some of the national newspapers are moving to the Wapping area and suggested that their chapel meetings could be held at the Autonomy Club. Vince Stevenson was critical of the club being used other than by anarchists, but accepted that the above suggestions may have to be adopted to get the club established. Bennett, who administers the funds, stated that of the £1,600 remaining, £600 would be used to buy equipment, the remainder being retained for emergencies. MSW then offered to pay for a public address system, and Privacy, a punk anarchist, stated that he knew of several punk groups who would be willing to pay to use the premises for practice sessions. Just pausing for a moment there, Ronan Bennett, in your witness statement, you describe him as a member of the Provisional IRA with a conviction for murder, which was overturned on appeal, the murder of a member of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Mr. Sorber says that Mr. Bennett was associated with the group that was itself associated with the INLA. Might you be mistaken about whether there was a connection with the IRA or the INLA?
Yes, and I think it may be that he was connected to a group called the IRSP, I think.
Irish Republican Socialist Party.
Socialist Party. I think it may have been that, but the other two elements about the arrest for murder of an RUC officer and his release on appeal were as stated.
Both you and Mr. Sorber are agreed that he was convicted,
Indeed.
and then the conviction was overturned on appeal. 4. The warehouse has been sectioned off to provide 2 offices, one for the club and the other for the use of Cienfuegos Press, Extra Collective and A Distribution. Bennett said the groups using the offices would collectively pay £10 per week for its use. It is interesting to note that one-way glass has been installed in the wall of the club's office in order that those in the office can observe people in the club unnoticed. Would you have regarded that as intelligence that was going to the requirement to know more about the premises?
Yes.
And then you provide some information in the next paragraph about openings, and over the page, arrangements for the opening night. Would that all be part and parcel of fulfilling the same requirement?
I believe so, yes.
While we're in this part of the bundle, sir, could we go to tab C96? And if we could take the document down and put up 15561. This is a report dated the 25th of August 1981. It says Box 500 letter, that's a reference to the security service, isn't it?
Sorry, yes.
blank reference, sysfile reference, blank, request clarification of the identification of male 1 who attended the Freedom Collective's 1980 Christmas party as being that of male 1. Inquiries made through a reliable source confirm that male 1 is in fact identical with male 1, but the source is unable to furnish further information as to his current views and activities. Is that a typical example of you replying to a security service specific request about a specific individual?
Yes, I believe so. I'll just add that this has been submitted by an SDS manager. So it's an example of where I provided the information, which may have been in writing, but it's been edited and adjusted within the office to respond to the Box 500 letter.
I see. Thank you. If we could take that down, please, and go to 15659. That's tab C116, please, sir. Now, this is dated a little later, 6th of October 1981. If we could look, please, at paragraphs 2 and 3 to start with. Sorry, 2 and 3. Submitted herewith is a plan of the Autonomy Centre, Metropolitan Wharf, Wapping Wall, E1. The premises are situated on the south side of the Wapping Wall on the first floor of the building to the immediate left of the opening marked Metropolitan Wharf. The opening area of about the open area of about 2,000 square feet has been partitioned with plasterboards into 2 offices and a toilet area. Entering Office C, the coin box telephone number 4813537 is attached to the far left wall. The office door is secured with a bird lock. And if we could go down to paragraph 4 and 5. There is detail about the access arrangements in 4 and the doors, and at 5 a second entrance is detailed, and there is more information about stairs, locks and so forth. And if we go over the page, we see the plan. We looked earlier at the request for details of the premises at Wapping that the Autonomy Centre was occupying. We saw a preliminary response with some material. Is this a further, later response with much more detail?
I believe so, yes.
So it's fair to say that you would keep in mind security service requests and fulfil them whenever you could?
Yes.
And would it be right to say as a general proposition that you regarded servicing the security services requests as a very important part of what you were doing?
Yes.
Can we go, please, to file 2, B12, please, 28769. This is a loose minute dated the 10th of March 1982, attaching a brief, again, for a visit to your managers at the SDS. If we could look at the next page, please. And could we look at the paragraphs? I'm afraid they haven't copied very well, but it's a paragraph right at the very top I'm first interested in. Any information about the possible anarchist allegiances of blank of the Centaur project, are these largely derived from his friendship with Freedom member blank, and then 2 paragraphs down, the Fair Fight campaign. Can source comment on the degree of anarchist involvement, including Big Flame, in the Fair Fight campaign? What are the group's plans for the future? Could we go now, please, to 18044 with that request, particularly the fair fight request, in mind? Sir, it's file 4, tab C194. This is a report dated the 28th of April 1982, starting with the first substantive paragraph, paragraph 2, please. Anarchist involvement in the Fair Fight campaign appears to have been minimal. The clear connection of the campaign organisers with Greater London Council radicals, particularly Dave Wetzel and other groups of the left, has deterred most anarchists who naturally find such heavy-handed, unimaginative organisation restrictive and distasteful. And then it goes on, indeed, the participation of Alan Alban, Privacy, and Arthur Moyes in the demonstration on Sunday, the 14th of March 1982, was intended to inject an element of humour into what had hitherto been seen as a particularly dull, humourless campaign. The anarchist method has been, as before, to avoid payment of fares as often as possible. I don't think I need read on beyond that. So this is you replying to the request for information about anarchist involvement in the Fair Fight campaign.
I believe so, yes.
And the answer being minimal. They weren't
Yes.
very interested in it. Can we now take that down, please, and have up 17183? So that's file 3, C171. That's a report of the 17th of February 1982. Submitted herewith are copies of 2 leaflets entitled respectively Stop the Increases and Fight for Fair Transport, issued by the Fair Fight campaign, Privacy. The leaflets, which have been received from a reliable source, are the first outside orders to have been undertaken by the anarchist Aldgate Press. Will this have been your reporting as it's leaflets printed by Aldgate Press?
I can't recall, but it's very likely.
If we look over the page, we see that the Fair Fight it was a campaign, wasn't it, about the fares on public transport in London?
I can't recall, but I accept from what I'm reading now it was, yes.
And if we go to the next page, there's a series of events. We can look at the details if we need to, but would it be fair to say that there's a very heavy GLC involvement in this campaign?
Yes.
We see mention of Ken Livingstone. There are also mentions of various other political groupings,
Yes.
including the Peckham Labour Party. This is a broad-based campaign about fare increases. What was the special branch interest in this sort of thing?
I can't recall.
And was there a feeling at that time that the GLC had been taken over by the far left and that an eye needed to be kept on them?
Well, I think that was the view of much of the media, as I recall from those times, but I don't recognise that as being the special branch view.
Did reporting this sort of information give you any pause for thought?
Only in terms of, I think, in the initial, and I'm interpreting what I believe was taking place here, only in terms of the possibility of some public disorder at one of the meetings or demonstrations or marches.
Was there any evidence that that either had happened or might happen?
No, I can't recall any.
Can you recall whether there was any management response to reporting this sort of material?
No, I can't recall.
Was there a general feeling that far-left influence within the GLC was a threat?
From my perspective, no. From the media perspective, yes. From the special branch perspective, I think it was a determination to look at the intelligence and where that led you. And I'm not sure there was any conclusion that there was far-left influence in the GLC.
Can I take it from your answers that there was at least enough interest to gather the intelligence and look at it?
Yes,
And I think self-evidently retain it as well.
yes.
Could we take that down now, please, and look at 28788, which is file 2D18, sir. Again, this is a covering leaf minute for a brief, or shopping list as I would call it, dated the 26th of July 1982. If we could go to the next page, please. And if we could look at the top. Has source any, under the heading 121 Bookshop, has source any information about the action described in the attached Daily Telegraph cutting? Were any members of the 121 Bookshop involved? We can look at the clipping in a moment. Can source comment on the relationship between the 121 anarchists and the Greenham Common Peace Women, who are using the 121 Bookshop premises as an office contact address? Does this imply any anarchist sympathies on the part of the women? And under the heading Oxford Street 48 Defence Committee, has source any information about the plans of the Oxford Street 48 Defence Committee run by members of the 121 Bookshop and Freedom? Now that was a defence committee formed, wasn't it, after a number of people were arrested and charged following a disturbance in Oxford Street after a CND demonstration, and they were anarchists. Is that right? If you can't remember, say so.
I'm terribly sorry, I can't remember, but I'm assuming that would be correct.
And if we go over the page, we see the Daily Telegraph article that the first request was referring to, and that was an attack on the home of the Conservative leader of Lambeth Council.
Yes.
Having seen those requests, could we go now, first of all, to 18484, please? That's file 4, tab C 253. You can see there, Mr. Pearce, that it's a report dated the 28th of July 1982. And if we look, please, at paragraph 2. no formal ties exist between pacifist groups such as London Peace Action, LPA, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, CND, and London Greenpeace, and anarchist groups such as 121 Anarchist Centre and Freedom Collective. It is thought that the recently formed anti-war support network, reported in Freedom Volume 43, number 14, for the 24th of July 1982, is directed towards coverage of actions which have the same generally libertarian aim rather than an attempt to bring the various groups together. So that's an answer to the request about whether there was a connection with the Greenham Common Women and what it was.
Yes.
Could we take that down, please, and go to 18572? So that's tab C262. This is a report of the 26th of August 1982, and if we could start paragraph 2, please. 2, 3 and 4 is what I need. Between 4 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. on Sunday the 22nd of August 1982, a meeting of the Oxford Street 48 support group took place at Centro Iberico, 421A Harrow Road, W10, attended by about 15 persons. The group was formed principally by Dave McCabe, with assistance from others of 121 Anarchist Centre to raise funds for payment of the fines of the young people, mainly punk members of the Anarchist Youth Federation and generally of little security interest, arrested in the course of disturbances in Oxford Street W1 on the afternoon of Sunday the 6th of June 1982. McCabe announced that about £80 had been received to date and that arrangements were in hand to organise fundraising gig by the punk band Crass. A bookstall might also be set up in the area of Portobello Road, W10. So this is your response to the inquiry about the Oxford 48 Defence Committee, isn't it?
I believe so, yes.
And would it be fair to say that this intelligence would also have been of interest to Special Branch?
Yes.
Why were Special Branch interested in the work of a defence committee?
I think I think the Special Branch would have no interest in defence committees unless the activities there could lead to the threat of public disorder. I think the substance of the committee meetings themselves would hold no interest to Special Branch because their interest is in preemptive intelligence to prevent things happening. Once arrests or prosecutions have been undertaken, their interest must evaporate and let the prosecution take its course. So I think, in answer to the question, that the only interest here for Special Branch would be if there was some prediction of public disorder or other criminal activity arising from that.
Take your time to look at the report, Mr. Pearce, but there isn't any such intelligence there, is there?
No.
Is that an example of excessive reporting?
Yes. And it might just add so that
yes.
It's excessive reporting, but it's a question of reporting things which, unknown to me as the reporter of them, may have some relevance in the wider jigsaw being built by MI5 or C Squad in Special Branch. But on the face of it, it's excessive reporting, I accept.
I think you can safely assume, for today's purposes, you're giving evidence as a very small cog in the wheel. You may be returning to give evidence when you were a different cog further up the machine. But for today, point taken for today. I've already asked you about how important the reporting for the security service was perceived to be. Can I ask you, how appreciative was the security service of your work?
I'm assuming they were. The evidence I have for that would be correspondence between F6 or F7 and the Special Branch, and secondly, the fact that they wanted to have a debrief with me at the conclusion of my deployment.
And meet you every 3 to 4 months.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Can we move now to a different topic? This is self-tasking. Having explored your responses to specific requests from the security service, I'd like to explore now with you how much of your reporting was essentially of your own volition, based upon your understanding of what Special Branch and the security service would be interested in.
Yes.
Can you give us an impression, please, as to the extent to which you exercised your discretion in reporting things?
Well, my discretion would be based upon the word subversion. How potentially or actually subversive could we consider these activities or plans to be? That I think was my fundamental rule of thumb as I went about my work.
And have I understood from your witness statement that your understanding of subversion, based on your training, was essentially directed at whether the group intended to overthrow or undermine the state?
Yes, it was first of all the potential for public disorder, but particularly with the anarchist groups which I was monitoring, the capacity or potential to commit a criminal act or incite disorder in a planned demonstration, or go about some other activity which could be perceived to be threatening the safety or well-being of the state.
There may be some elision between these concepts, but I'd like to keep them clear for a moment. I'll come back to law and order, and I'll come back to public order in a moment. But subversion, your understanding that a subversive group was one which intended to overthrow or undermine the state?
Overthrow would be obviously an overstatement. Undermine would be relevant, and thirdly, it could be individual acts which could be interpreted as threatening the safety or well-being of the state, such as an explosive device or a violent demonstration which disrupts infrastructure, something of that nature.
Sure. Would I be right that you, and I'm meaning you collectively, not you personally
Yes.
as an undercover officer, but the feeling at the time was not focusing so much on the potency of the group, but more upon its aims?
Well, I think it's both. I think I certainly tried, and I think others did too, to apply the principles of what's aspirational, what's intentional, and where is their capability. And with anarchist groups, it was particularly difficult to make that determination. But that's what I tried to do. And almost entirely it was aspirational. Very rarely was there capability to effectively and realistically damage the safety or well-being of the state.
But it was all reported on?
Yes, and something like, for an example, the attempted attack in Torness, the attempt to incite violence at the Brixton riots, the placing of incendiary devices, the placing of a bomb on the Northern Line. Those type of things would be, in my view, things which would be reported as soon as possible and would be relevant to judgments about subversion capability.
I mean, were you thinking of subversion separately from public disorder and crime, or were you rolling them all together?
I rolled them all together.
And I think it's fair to say you cast your net very wide and reported everything.
I'm sorry, sir?
You cast your net very wide and reported everything.
Yes, indeed.
Let's move now then to some of that reporting. I'd like to start first with some of the suggestions we see in the papers of pretty serious crimes. First of all, in your witness statement, you talk about a bomb on the North London line.
Yes.
Can you help us with when this was?
I can't recall the date. I think it was quite early on in my deployment, actually.
Can you recall what happened?
Yes. It was, I think, described by SO13 as a barrel bomb, extremely crude, and had been lying there unnoticed in position for about a month before it was discovered.
And what was your role in events?
I think I probably, when I heard about it, telephoned it in to the office.
How did you hear about it?
I can't recall.
Was there any connection with your group, with the Freedom Collective?
I couldn't determine that, but I think it was as a result of my call that police discovered the bomb, the crude bomb.
But you can't recall at all how that knowledge came to you, who from, how?
No, I mean somebody in the group would have told me, but I wouldn't have been able to determine from that whether people associated with my group or in my group were responsible for it.
Can we be clear here? Because I think there's been a description of Freedom being an area where a lot of anarchists drifted in and out to
Yes.
visit the bookshop and come and talk and so forth. Are we talking about members of the Freedom Collective, or are we talking about people drifting in and out, or are you simply unable to assist us?
I think we're talking about either people drifting in or out, or the, if I might say, subgroup of Freedom, the younger, more militant element who may have given me information on this.
And what was the result of your phoning in this intelligence?
I think the result was that police discovered the bomb, which was had been lying there for, I think, a month, unnoticed.
Are you able to assist us at all with who manufactured and planted the device?
No.
So it would be right to say you wouldn't be able to help us as to whether it was anarchists or somebody else?
That's true. But it may be that I was told by an anarchist that it had been placed by an anarchist.
And did you, as I understand your statement, you didn't receive any commendations during your service, and I'm not trying to do your service down, but it wasn't regarded as a sufficiently big deal that you should get a commendation or anything?
I think that's true.
Can we move to a pamphlet, please? It's in folder 3, sir, tab 102. It's at 15574. More correctly, a report about a pamphlet. This is a report dated the 7th of September 1981, and if we could have, please, paragraphs 2, 3 and 4 up to start with. On the evening of the 25th of August 1981, Privacy, Privacy, Privacy and Privacy met to discuss production of a pamphlet intended to incite further disturbances in London and elsewhere. Owing to the absence of privacy and privacy in Pentonville Prison, the pamphlet would lack the impact of advice born out of personal experience. However, a list of matters discussed at the meeting contains the following without further expansion. Molotovs, is that short for Molotov cocktail?
I imagine so, yes.
Radio, targets, reconnaissance, expropriation, vehicle demobilisation, first aid. The greater part of the pamphlet will probably be written by Privacy, who will derive much of the material from the anarchist cookbook. I'll just pause there. Could you give us a flavour of what was in the anarchist cookbook, if you are able to do so?
I can't recall, but I understand it was, of my fading memory, it would be a manual and a handbook on the construction of crude improvised devices and other lethal weapons.
Is that explosive or incendiary devices, that sort of thing?
I think both, yes.
If we pick it up, the risk of detection and prosecution is said to lie with the distribution rather than the typesetting or printing, which can be made untraceable. And if we go down to paragraph 5, please. The document is not identical with the eyewitness account of the riots produced by Privacy, and others, which is to be printed and distributed abroad, probably in America. So, am I right to understand that you are here reporting an intention to put together and distribute a pamphlet which will provide information that would assist somebody who wished to cause serious public disorder?
Yes, but I can't recall submitting it.
And how common was literature of this nature in the anarchist scene?
Uncommon, I think.
Can we take that down, please, and move to another example? 17097, please. So this is volume 3, tab C159. This is a report dated the 20th of January 1982. This is referring to a publication called My Little Black Book.
Yes.
And if we could start with the first 2 paragraphs, please. Following information has been received from a secret and reliable source. Steve Sorber and Privacy of Aldgate Press, Angel Alley, Whitechapel High Street, E1 are currently engaged in production of a publication to be entitled My Little Black Book, which is expected to contain more controversial material than the Anarchist Cookbook or the more recent Guide to a Citizen's Militia. And if we could go down, please. The document was brought from the USA by Privacy and was allegedly compiled by a disillusioned member of the Green Berets who apparently concluded that the state should not hold all the cards any longer. It is said that the publication, to be typeset and bound into a volume of about 400 pages, will contain information relating to the manufacture of explosives and detonators, techniques of assassination, construction of improvised weapons, and other data invaluable to the urban guerrilla. The publication has been set up and financed by Martin Peacock, who has provided £1,700, probably through a distribution by whom the book will be distributed. Aldgate Press will produce the document at cost price, and it is hoped to recoup some profit from the retail price of £6 for each of the 1,000 copies. If we could go down to paragraph 6, please. At present, knowledge of the project has been confined to Sorber, Privacy, Peacock, Privacy, and Dave McCabe, with the intention of claiming that the book is an import from America. However, it is likely that secrecy will be difficult to maintain, at least among other members of Freedom Collective, when printing starts in the near future. It is undoubtedly hoped that the book will initiate direct action throughout the country, but a no less important wish is that it will prove irresistibly provocative to the authorities and thereby result in a much-needed cause célèbre. Now, is this your reporting?
I believe so.
And are you able to help us with the contents of the little black book? Do you have any recollection of the contents now?
I think it's similar to the account I've described in relation to the anarchist cookbook. It was plans for two things. One, the construction of improvised explosive devices or incendiary devices, and secondly, the construction of other lethal weapons. And both of these would have the capability to maim or kill.
And what was the Special Branch approach to intelligence about the publication of this sort of material?
I think the approach was to invite me to monitor developments until the time came to remove the book or the plans from the building where it was being stored prior to distribution.
It appears from your own face of your own report, it's right to say this material had already been published in the United States.
It appears that way, yes.
What was the concern from a policing point of view about its publication in this country?
That it would be distributed more widely in Britain. It would be on the streets of London, for example, and there'd be perfectly reasonable apprehension that it could be used for the purposes I've just described.
We heard evidence yesterday that this was regarded by Stephen Sorber as a purely commercial proposition, which is at odds with paragraph 6 of this report, which I've just read, about what the intention behind publication was. Are you able to help us now as to anything you can recall that was said or done at the time which makes you think that it was either a purely commercial proposition or whether it was being published in the hope of initiating direct action?
It's the second. I think the hope was that, irrespective of any financial gain, the intention was that this should be disseminated on the streets of London and beyond, inviting people to take direct action using the implements described therein. So very much for me and for the Special Branch, a public safety issue.
Can you help us from your time with the Freedom Collective with anything said or done that would point for or against purely commercial publication?
I think the Freedom Collective as a whole would have no interest in the kind of violence which one might anticipate from publication and dissemination of this book. It would have an interest in making some capitalist gain from its distribution.
That's not the same as hoping for direct action.
No, I believe Freedom Collective would not wish to see the type of direct action one might apprehend from the publication of these kind of plans.
Can we move now to the 5th of April 1982, when the police raided both Freedom and Little A Press? Mr. Sorber was arrested. Was that raid the result of your intelligence?
Yes.
You have produced a report which we can turn up, if needs be, in the aftermath of the raid, which encapsulates Mr. Sorber's defence. But it also goes on to say that but for the raid, Mr. Peacock was intending to distribute the literature. Is it right that if this material had not been intercepted in the way that it was, your belief was that Mr. Peacock was going to circulate the material?
Yes.
And then you report again in late May on who has has still got the two surviving original copies of the material, and the intention of the holders, which was to do nothing with it for the moment. Did you regard that as important intelligence?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat the last sentence?
I think I'm trying to cut too many corners, Mr. Pearce. Let's call up the report.
It's my
It's
hearing.
18213.
I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. So it's tab C211 in volume 4 if you want the hard copy. This is a report dated the 28th of May 1982. Paragraph 2, both copies of the original material for the interrupted publication of My Little Black Book, brought to this country by privacy over Christmas 1981, are now known to be extant. One is in the possession of Stuart Christie, as already reported, and the other remains in the possession of privacy. The latter subject is fortunate that his home address at privacy was not raided at the time of the search of Freedom premises by anti-terrorist branch officers on the 1st of April 1982, for the document lay clearly visible on his desk. Privacy now plans to remove it to a safer place as soon as the opportunity arises. Although Christie and privacy appear concerned to preserve the material, it is still considered unlikely at this stage that they will seek to publish, at least whilst a decision is anxiously awaited from the Director of Public Prosecutions.
Thank you.
So it's right, isn't it? You are continuing to report on this saga, and in particular where the source material is.
Yes.
And that was regarded by Special Branch as important intelligence.
Yes.
Can you assist us a little bit with Mr. Christie and his reputation within the anarchist circle?
Mr. Christie was held in very high regard by anarchists throughout the country. He had great credibility because of his, I believe, arrest for allegedly attempting to assassinate Franco. His connection with the Angry Brigade prosecution. And he was a true dyed-in-the-wool anarchist to whom many looked up.
Was it a credible possibility that he might have done something with the instructions in the Little Black Book, either by disseminating them or in any other way?
I believe his motivation would have been in that direction, yes, to disseminate.
Did you get any management feedback for your work in regards of the Little Black Book?
I think C Squad management were appreciative of it. SDS were, and it seemed to be regarded by them as an example of the kind of work that we should be doing.
Could we take that down, please, now, and move on to another incident? This is a report about an attack or attempted attack on the British consulate in Amsterdam. It's 15855, so file 5 C299. It's dated the 2nd of, if you could blow that up so we can see the date, please. 2nd of November 1982, and then if we could have the first couple of paragraphs, please. The following information has been received from a secret and reliable source. Further details have recently come to light regarding the alleged firebomb attack by Privacy on the British consulate in Amsterdam. It appears that Privacy and another, armed with petrol bombs, breached the perimeter of the compound and reached a window through which they intended to throw the devices. Before they could do so, however, it is claimed that they were disturbed by security patrols or police in the grounds and aborted the action, making good their escape. The strength of the allegation is impossible to assess with certainty, there being no corroboration from other sources. Nevertheless, it is considered that the secrecy maintained about the incident, coupled with Privacy's rather quiet personality, inclined towards the view that the attempt was made. In that event, it provides valuable evidence of the subject's character, and then you confirm that the photograph of privacy on the file is a good likeness. I say you do that. Is this your reporting?
I believe it is.
And can you help us as to how you came about that information?
No, I can't recall anything about the source, but to me it's an example of SDS determining between aspiration, intention and capability, and here I'm pointing out the dilemma in deciding between those three.
I see. And even though this attack seems to have ended up with a desultory result, that
Yes.
was of a gravity that would be of interest to Special Branch.
Yes.
Can we move now to Wakefield? And well, before we go to South Yorkshire, so it's 3 minutes to 1, I'm about to move on to the Wakefield.
How long is that going to take?
Not too long, a few minutes.
Well, let's do that and then we'll break.
South Yorkshire it is, then, sir. Thank you. There was a bomb, wasn't there, at the prison officers' training school?
I have a vague recollection of this.
Could we look at 15961? It's file 5, tab 313, sir. This is a report dated the 23rd of November 1982. Paragraph 2, set out below is the text of a communique posted to Freedom Press by the Angry Brigade's resistance movement. The document, a photocopy, was posted in Wakefield at 2 p.m. on Saturday the 13th of November 1982. It was addressed in blue stencil as follows: Freedom 84, Whitechapel, High Street, London, E1. Reads, 2. Prison Officers Training Centre, Wakefield. We have decided to blow up your Prison Officers Training Centre. As the situation we face becomes more desperate, people have to take more desperate measures in order to survive. Your response is to lock us up. Your prisons are packed more than ever before. The only industry that is booming is the repressive industry, and we don't like it. How many thousands of us are rotting in your prisons simply for trying to survive? We are not unreasonable people, but we have been pushed too far. We have nothing left to lose. We will not sit by while you practice your torture and murder. Remember Barry Prosser. No doubt you will suppress the truth of this attack as you have with previous actions, but that will not deter us. We don't like you. We don't like the state you are a part of. We don't like the governments you serve. Look over your shoulder, pigs. We are everywhere. We will defend ourselves. Angry Brigades Resistance Movement. And if we could go to the next paragraph, please. The bottom of the page, thank you. Whilst the unfortunate Wakefield prison officers cannot have failed to grasp the gist of this rather heavy-handed message, the document is considered unimpressive even by anarchist standards, lacking the developed argument and more. If we could go over the page now. Fluid style of the mysterious Angry Brigade 2 communique. And then could we have paragraphs 5 to 8? So you're reporting the communique there, aren't you?
Yes.
Which was presumably designed to have an impact on the prison officers to whom it was addressed.
Yes.
Can you recall whether or not there was an explosion at Wakefield?
No, I can't.
Right. Well, we may come to some documents. No information has yet come to light regarding those responsible for the explosion at Wakefield on Saturday the 13th of November 1982. However, 3 unconfirmed statements by Privacy in recent weeks indicate the existence of anarchists both willing and equipped to execute such actions. Mr. Sorber made the point yesterday that it wasn't much of an explosion. Can I take it from the fact you don't recall it, that it probably wasn't much of an explosion? As reported elsewhere, Privacy is in close touch with a Sheffield contact, possibly with military training, engaged in researching methods of causing explosions. He is now in possession of part of this comrade's research material. At the Direct Action Movement DAM conference in Leeds over the weekend of the 30th to the 31st of October 1982, Privacy stated he met a friend of Privacy who claimed to have ready access to or be in possession of explosive detonators and a gun. Whilst Privacy's wife, Privacy dismissed such a disclosure to a stranger as unlikely or as a means of impressing a London comrade, Privacy believed it to be true. Finally, Privacy referred to a recent small explosion at a disused World War II bunker in or near Huntingdon. This, he speculated, may have been the rehearsal for a later attack. And then the usual special branch references. This conveys the impression that you are filing a report via the SDS back office with not just a communique, but any intelligence that you can give that might assist with the investigation. Is that right?
Yes.
And this intelligence is coming from you?
Yes.
In the result, do you know whether anybody was ever apprehended for this?
No.
No, they weren't, or no, you don't know?
No, I don't recall.
Thank you. And then there was a raid, wasn't there, again on Freedom Press because of the communique seeking the envelope.
Well, I can't recall the raid following the production of this report, but I accept that there was.
It was a very long time ago. Let's look at, if we take that document down, please, and have 18983. So this is file 2, tab B23. This is a special branch report dated the 17th of December 1982. On Thursday, the 9th of December 1982, I accompanied a team of 8 West Yorkshire police officers under the command of D.I. Blank, West Yorkshire Police, to search the premises of Freedom Press, Angel Alley, Whitechapel E1. The team was also accompanied by a D.I. Blank of COC 13. West Yorkshire Police were making inquiries into a bomb which exploded outside HM Prison Officers Training School, Arborford Road, Wakefield, West Yorkshire. Sorry, I got my counties wrong. West Yorkshire, not South Yorkshire. At 02:30 hours on Saturday the 13th of November 1982, Freedom had published without comment a communique from the Angry Brigade's resistance movement which claimed responsibility for the explosion. West Yorkshire Police were particularly concerned to recover the original copy of the communique and the envelope in which it was sent in order to test both forensically and for fingerprints. And then I think we'll be careful not to spend too long, but we see Mr. Sorber was there, and if we can go over the page to paragraph 5 at the bottom, we see this is this records what Mr. Sorber has to say. D.I. Blank interviewed Sorber regarding the typesetting process, and Sorber admitted setting the type for the communique. He stated that he had not seen the envelope, but the communique had been a photostat, which he had, in accordance with usual Freedom Press practice, thrown away after setting up the type. Sorba claimed that all articles, etc., are not needed once a type is set, and therefore they are thrown away. The type is then destroyed after printing. The refuse collectors would, according to him, have removed both from the premises a week before the raid. If we could go now to paragraph 6. It explains that the police left and then came back. I'll pick up halfway down. West Yorkshire officers returned to the premises at 7 p.m. The following persons were present at Freedom when they entered. All claimed to be engaged in an editorial meeting. Particulars given could not be verified. There's the list of names: Dave McCabe, a private one we've redacted for privacy, and then your name. And then it recalls that the police then left, having seized some documents. Can you recall this at all?
I have a vague recollection of being present when the property was raided. Yes.
Can you recall any conversation around the raid, and in particular what the police had been seeking to seize?
No, I can't. Just as stated here, really.
And can you help us at all with whether disposing of the type and the envelope would have been routine?
No, I can't.
Whether or not it was routine, did you get the impression from those you were infiltrating that they were pleased or disappointed not to be able to assist the police?
No, I can't.
There's another report, which I don't think we need to turn up, which simply says that you found no further intelligence about the matter. Can you recall any management reaction to the Wakefield bombing and your reporting on it?
No.
Aldershot after lunch, sir, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Roughly how much longer do you expect to be?
I'm making good progress.
Yes.
I mean, it won't be a short day, but equally it won't be a very long one.
No. So we won't be sitting until 6, you don't think?
I don't think so.
No. Right, good. That will no doubt come as a relief to everybody, especially those who have domestic responsibilities. That then I think means that we can have the full hour for lunch, and we'll start again at 2:10.